Here's a clip of the All In boys getting frustrated with this AI narrative. And I think they might just be right. Check this out.
Average working American and their perception of AI, you have job loss, you have electric bills going up, and then you have, hey, fake news, the reality, is this real or not? These Sora slop videos I'm seeing, it feels like there's a little bit of a trend towards a negative framing of the AI innovation, and maybe it's not going to help the bottom half of society. Are you seeing that? Do you believe it? And do you have plans to counter it?
Well, what I see is that we just came off a quarter of 3.8% economic growth, of which 40% was attributable to AI. So in other words, if we didn't have this AI boom going on, by my math, our GDP growth rate in Q2 would have been 2.3% instead of 3.8%. So AI is the difference between having great GDP growth, say around 4%, and modest GDP growth around 2%. But it seems to me that everyone who wants to have a great economy should be supportive of this AI boom that's happening. The job loss narrative is just that. It's just a narrative. It's a story. The media loves to tell it. It's mostly theoretical. You can point to a few jobs here and there, but there's no evidence of widespread job loss. This is just something that people are prognosticating about the future. And in every previous technological revolution that we've had, yes, the jobs have shifted, but they've shifted from more rote jobs to more sophisticated jobs that create a higher standard of living for everybody. The best example being that in the year 1900, 50% of the US economy was involved in agriculture. In other words, one out of every two people were farmers. By the year 2000, that number dropped to 2%. The difference, the 48% did not become unemployed. They went off and did other things. They worked in factories, for example, and they went into the services part of the economy. So I think what's going to happen here is that AI is going to enable people to shift their work to more gratifying and less rote parts of the economy that will increase productivity and standards of living for everybody. Biology has a really good way of explaining this. And I think this goes to the heart of why the job loss narrative is a fallacy, is because humans are end-to-end. What makes them really good and irreplaceable is that they can do an entire job end-to-end and they can pivot their objective and figure out what their objective should be. AI is not like that. It has to be told what to do. It has to be prompted. And then when it gives you a result, that result has to be validated to make sure it's not hallucinating. And then frequently, you don't really get the result you're looking for. So you have to iterate and you have to reprompt and you go through this loop where you do it over and over again until you get something that's valuable. So in other words, humans do the prompting and validation. AI does the stuff in the middle. So as biology says, humans are end-to-end, AI is middle to middle. This is why fundamentally, I think that AI and humans will be very synergistic. AI will not be a replacement for humans. They're going to do the stuff in the middle that humans don't like to do. And it's going to allow humans to be much more productive. So right now, I'm very optimistic about this boom. And I do think that people who are criticizing it should really think about whether they want the US to have 2% growth rates or 4% growth rates, because that's what we're really talking about here.
We'll get back to that clip in just a moment, but first, some thoughts on AI contributing 40% of GDP growth, the job loss narrative, and the agriculture example. The media has convinced everyone AI is a job crisis, when actual data proves it's one of the only reasons we're not in an economic slowdown right now. Mr. Sachs reveals that 40% of last quarter's 3.8 GDP growth came from AI, meaning without it, we'd only be at 2.3% growth. And he also dismisses job loss fears as theoretical media stories with no evidence of widespread displacement. This to me does seem like a classic case of feelings versus facts. People get scared about AI because scary headlines get clicks, but the economy is literally growing faster because of AI, not slower. The end-to-end versus middle-to-middle distinction is crucial. AI can't set its own goals, can't verify its own work, and can't adapt when circumstances change. It's a tool that makes the middle part of work faster, not a replacement for human judgment and decision-making. Think about what this means practically. A lawyer using AI still needs to decide what legal strategy to pursue. Prompt the AI correctly, check if the research is accurate, and adjust the approach based on the client's actual needs. The AI just speeds up the research portion in the middle. The lawyer is still doing the valuable work at both ends. This is why the unemployment rate isn't spiking even as AI adoption accelerates. AI is making workers more productive, not obsolete. More productive workers generate more economic value, which creates more opportunities, which creates more jobs. That's why 40% of GDP growth is coming from AI while employment remains strong. The people worried about AI destroying jobs are making the same mistake as the people who thought calculators would eliminate the need for mathematicians. Tools that make you faster at your job don't eliminate your job, they make you more valuable.
And the data showing there's a bit of a serious problem right now with young people getting jobs specifically because of AI. And obviously GDP is not wages. The people we're talking about who are affected by these job losses don't own equities. The top 55% of the country own equities. So what do you think about this narrative? Do you think it's a false narrative, a true narrative, somewhere in between?
Okay, here's how I would think about what may happen. Rather than think about someone, quote, losing their job, which, is a term you keep using and others keep using. And
displacement, I think would be,
I don't know, whatever it is, you're acting like they're passively in a victim state. We have the lowest unemployment in history, and there's an extraordinary demand for new capacity of work by humans to do stuff in the United States right now because of the extraordinary manufacturing build out that is underway, driven largely by AI and soon to be robotics and several other industries. We just talked about rare earths mining and processing. There are many industries that are taking off in this country that have not existed. And there is a demand for labor. And when there's a demand for labor and there's a shortage of people to do the work, the employer typically says, let's go recruit, let's go spend, let's go train. And when you have an innovation cycle like is underway right now, the hiring for the new jobs happens before the loss of the old jobs happens. So you have to have someone that builds all the Model Ts before people stop becoming horse buggy drivers. They're going to get paid. They're going to get offered money to go do those jobs. So what typically happens in these cycles is that there's a recruitment exercise, a recruiting cycle that happens up front. And so rather than say all these drivers are going to lose their jobs, another way to frame it is that all of these drivers are going to be offered new, higher paying jobs before there's lower demand for driving. I can go make twice as much money per hour by going over to take this new job. I'm getting paid twice as much and I get to work on more interesting stuff. I like that. That is the more positive view on how what you're calling job displacement actually plays out in the US economy in the decade ahead. A recruiting cycle precedes the elimination of old jobs that aren't needed anymore. That recruiting cycle is a net positive for people. They say, wow, that is an amazing improvement in my income, an improvement in my lifestyle. I get to work on more interesting things. My life is better because of it. And then years later, the demand for those old jobs starts to die down. But at that point, everyone's been recruited away anyway.
We'll get back to the clip in a moment, but first, some thoughts on Friedberg's recruitment cycle theory. New jobs being created before old jobs disappear. The entire framing of job loss is backwards. Workers don't get displaced, they get recruited into better opportunities before their old job even disappears. Friedberg explains that in innovation cycles, someone has to build the Model Ts before horse and buggy drivers lose work. So hiring for new jobs precedes elimination of the old ones. This completely flips the victim narrative on its head. The timeline matters more than people realize. You don't wake up one day and your job is gone. You wake up and someone offers you double your salary to get something else done. The psychological difference is massive. Getting laid off feels like failure and creates anxiety. Getting recruited for a better job feels like success and creates optimism. But both results in you leaving your current position. The outcome is the same, but the experience is completely opposite. This is already happening right now with AI data centers needing builders. AI companies need trainers and evaluators. Manufacturing facilities need operators. All of these pay significantly better than many of the jobs people worry will be automated. The recruiting is happening today while the automation is still years away. The reason this pattern holds is basic economics. New industries need workers immediately to scale up. Old industries decline slowly as the new alternative gradually takes market share. That time gap means opportunity always precedes displacement. You get the new job offer before your old job becomes obsolete. This is why looking at technology transitions through a job loss lens misses the point entirely. Yes, buggy driver positions eventually disappeared, but those same people had already moved on to better paying factory jobs years earlier. They weren't victims of progress, they were beneficiaries of it.
So Friedberg, you mentioned the Model T putting all the horse and buggies out of business. If we had today's media environment around back in the days of Henry Ford, that's exactly what they would have been bemoaning, is that all the horse and buggy guys are going to be put out of business. And part of the reason why that would have been a very bad take is because it's easy to see the people who are being displaced in the short term, like maybe the Uber drivers or something like that. But it's hard to see all the new industries and all the new businesses and all the new jobs that don't even exist yet that are going to be created. So for example, what were the downstream effects of the Model T? Well, first of all, it created this new kind of industrial assembly line, which applied not just to cars, but to all sorts of goods. I mean, Henry Ford pioneered that. And that had huge ramifications for the US becoming the industrial power that it ultimately became, which led it to winning World War II. Then just in terms of the car, you had things like the build out of the interstate highway system.
The tire industry.
Yeah, but just you think about the highways that led to Holiday Inn and hotels and motels and drive-through windows and McDonald's and car culture. And
the taxi cab industry itself emerged.
George Lucas got his start as a director by making the film American Graffiti, which was all about car culture in the 1950s. So that led to Star Wars. I mean, there's all these butterfly effects of the Model T being invented, which are absolutely massive. And it would have been impossible to foresee all of that stuff 100 years ago. When you have these new industrial revolutions or these new technological revolutions, it's going to increase the capacity of humans to design all sorts of new products, create all sorts of new businesses. And what we've seen is that this lump of labor fallacy that you have all these humans that we don't know what to do with has always proven to be a fallacy throughout human history.
And by the way, those buggy drivers did not lose their jobs. They chose to go into one of these new industries where they were offered more money.
We're terrible at predicting the industries AI will create because the biggest impacts come from combinations nobody can foresee yet. Model T led to assembly lines that made America an industrial powerhouse that won World War II, which then led to highways, then Holiday Inns, drive-through McDonald's, and American car culture. AI will have similar butterfly effects that seem ridiculous to predict now, but will be obvious in hindsight. Maybe AI-designed proteins lead to a new materials revolution that enables space elevators, that make Mars colonization economical, that creates an entire off-world economy. Okay, maybe that sounds crazy, but people assume there's only so much work to be done. So automation means unemployment, but human wants are infinite. Every time we automate something, we free up capacity to work on the next thing we want but couldn't afford before. Technological advancements will open up the door to new opportunities. Agriculture went from 50% to 2% of the workforce, and we didn't end up with 48% unemployment. We ended up with factories, services, entertainment, technology, entire categories of work that didn't exist when everyone was farming. The work didn't disappear, it evolved into forms that created higher living standards. The key insight is that the buggy drivers chose to leave. They weren't forced out. They saw better opportunities and took them. That's not a tragedy. That's how progress works. AI will create opportunities people voluntarily choose because they're better than what exists now. And 20 years later, we'll look back and wonder how we ever lived without them. If you enjoyed this video, why not consider hitting subscribe? Cheers.